Well, ladies and gentlemen, I am super excited to bring in our next speaker for the day, John Schwartz. John Schwartz is the head of Enterprises Global Business Development at edX and Government Practices. Most recently, John was a board member and chief strategist at Hudson and Cutler, a technology-driven marketing and communication company. Let's go ahead and welcome John on board.
Good morning or good afternoon, depending on what part of the world you're in. I am coming to you live from upstate New York on a very rainy, windy day, but really happy to be here and obviously disappointed that we're unable to meet in person. Although I was in the region a few weeks ago for the Higher Education Summit in Dubai. So it looks like hopefully in-person conferences will get back on track, because it's really nice to see faces and interact on a personal level. And I think people are struggling with listening to people. And I know I'm your last speaker of the day, so I'll try to make it interesting and leave enough time for questions. So, what I want to talk about today is really things that you're all on this call aware of and are kind of happening in the world, and just kind of give a very simplistic roadmap and not overcomplicate things. Higher ed is going through, a tremendous evolution. In some cases it's a revolution, depending whether you're on the inside of a university or college or academic organization, or you're on the outside. And, there's just so many things that COVID taught us. First and foremost, it really showed the world and all of the skeptics and cynics that providing good quality online education to learners is a positive thing. They learn and retain those skills, and they can use them successfully in the workforce. So, universities in the beginning really struggled, and then they adapted to their credit by using external content to supplement their curriculums. Because look, we went from zero to everybody online in less than 3 weeks. So there's not a university on the planet, including the ones I represent, Harvard and MIT and 160 of the top institutions, that had the ability to pivot and provide their content online. So, why are we one of the leaders in this conversation? Very simply because we were one of the first people back in 2012 when Harvard and MIT came together and said, we need to provide access. Quality content, quality learning is a right to everybody on the planet. That was the original notion, and that hasn't changed today. So our mission of bringing the top content in all the trending, important, key critical areas hasn't changed. All of our content can still be accessed in what we call the audit mode. So, our founder, who's a 35-year tenured professor at MIT still, really had this vision of educating the world and providing this content no matter who you are, no matter what your socioeconomic background was. And if you fast forward to today, like I said, we have 160 of the top institutions in the world. We're offering courses from those universities and enterprises. You see Google and Amazon, because the world has changed. Everybody wants to be part of this narrative. And in many cases, if you're not part of it, you somewhat become irrelevant. So you can take courses to refresh your skills. Universities can use those courses and provide credit in their curriculums, which many are doing today through our online campus program. We also offer a full 4-year degree, but the idea of the degree is to make it stackable. So as learners take courses from Columbia or Harvard, MIT, you're getting a requisite skill set that those learners can then use in the workplace. And, one of the kind of themes, the reason it's from, higher ed to hired is that, there is a growing skills gap due to the fast pace of technology between what learners coming out of university, the skills, they don't all have the requisite skills they need to be entry-level ready in many organizations. So the idea of schools closing that gap and using additional resources becomes really important. So, as I mentioned, our online campus, and because we're talking about higher education, when COVID started, it was really a very scary moment, an inflection point, I think, for all of you. And it certainly was for us as well. Within 3 days, our entire company was fully remote, and yet the demand for online digital content grew exponentially. In fact, we had 10 times more learners in those first 3 months of COVID. I think we had 11 million new learners than we had in all of 2019. So our idea at the time was, hey, look, if you're a university and now you've been interrupted and everybody's online, we have 3,000 plus courses that you can plug and play in your curriculums. So learner disruption is at a very minimum. And while it was a scramble to find the right courses, figure out how to get them online, for most universities, it was a pretty seamless experience. And learner interruption was very minimal. And then the light bulb went off that, you know what? We can tap into these external resources. It doesn't do our university a disservice, and we can blend in this quality content in addition to our own curriculum. And we found over the course of the last 2 years, a lot of trends that we weren't surprised about, but I think people in academia, also felt somewhat enlightened by the findings. So what did we hear from students in general? 40% of bachelor seeking learners, they don't complete their degree, right? That's just kind of what the global statistic was. But during COVID, and this is important, 58% said that COVID will impact their decision to seek additional education. And a lot of that is due to a global consortium of content providers that showed those digitally savvy learners that there was a way to continue their studies that was cost effective, that was maybe part of their school or not part of their school, that in many cases was credit worthy, and was asynchronous in that the learner could control when they took a course so they could balance it with all the things we all collectively faced being in a lockdown. And, we saw this tremendous trend, for those of us that have been in digital education and online learning, and I go back almost 6 years, it was an uphill battle to get universities and professors and academics alike to really, embrace the value of online learning and what the potential benefits were. Students, on the other hand, who had grown up digitally savvy, were already very comfortable in that space. So it was trying to have a marriage of both sides recognize the intrinsic value. And universities and academies and nonprofits were forced to come together because that's all that was offered. So we saw this tremendous uptick with students willing and wanting to take online courses, which certainly helped the offerings from those universities that all of a sudden had a pivot 360 from the in-classroom environment and now provide online services. So what do we hear from universities? There's this growing concern. 87% is a really big statistic that, how do we provide access for lower income students? online learning is really that key tool that universities can use. I mean, and because you have such a variety of top quality institutions providing that, it really becomes an extension of the university of itself. And like I said, many universities, there's over 1,000 top universities now that again are infusing their own in-person curriculum with online learning, which gives the student, real tangible benefits. And I know I'll get asked this in the chat. By no means are we advocating one or the other. We solely believe, and I think, those of us that have been in this a while, the future of learning is some form of blended learning. Being in person is absolutely essential. We know that from a socialization perspective and psychological perspective, but there is a very definitive place depending on how you infuse online learning. So what else do we hear from universities? There's no question that the workload has increased, and work-life balance, it's not there. We feel this on our side as well, simply because professors and deans and provosts and your executive committees are all being pulled in so many directions. They are trying to stay on the curve of relevancy, and they know in order to be relevant, some type of online offering to bring their brand, their quality of expertise, their quality of content to 6.5 billion people becomes very important. And it's not necessarily a function of, hey, we've got a lot of money in our trust to be sustainable. In order to be relevant and sustainable, having some type of online offering to your current students and to students that have aspirations of getting a degree but can't come onto campus, which satisfies this first statistic, is important. And look, because things have developed so fast, needing access to online resources, organizations like edX have really helped bridge that gap. And by no means do I want anybody to think on this call we're the only ones, but the tools that a university needs to seamlessly integrate into their curriculums exist. The reason that number is so high, and rightly so, is that it was a pain point up until the pandemic. Nobody prior was forced to roll up their sleeves and figure out how to create online content in a broad scale and figure out how to properly integrate it into the brick and mortar curriculum. So universities are challenged. They're resource challenged. There's a general frustration because the world has changed so quickly. There was really no time to ramp up. But I would say optimistically that COVID forced us to jump in, as uncomfortable as it was. And I'm sure most of you on this call that represent a university saw that you could provide this offering and saw very little interruption, for your students, which is the most essential, thing. And most importantly, when we think about what employers are telling us about what you're all collectively doing, the game is changing. The game is really changing. There's a very, broad push towards broadening of skills from hard to human. That's not to say computer science and data analysis aren't as relevant. It's saying that the new line worker has to have a broad range of skills, whether they're technical or not, because in most cases, they're going to be either interacting or managing some form of technology. In 2012, and we have almost 47 million people on the platform, there was this tremendous interest in leadership skills and emotional intelligence and diversity inclusion. And if you take all those competencies together, you are shaping a very well-rounded worker. So again, the world has changed as such that those of us like myself that were liberal arts majors and at one point in time said, well, you didn't really have a specialty, you weren't really trained for anything, that seems to be coming full circle. Having a certain amount of understanding and broad general overview of how those things can be impactful in the world. So this whole idea of non-degree credentials, it's surging, and by no means is this a replacement for universities, but here's the reality, and you all know this, and it's been kind of our mantra. There's a lot of reasons why students are coming out of university and having a hard time finding work, and mostly because a lot of them, not all, but a lot of students do not have the skills, either technical or soft, that enterprises and governments are looking for. And I can tell you, and this isn't meant to be by any means a scare tactic, but for those of us that have been in the enterprise world for the last 25 years, of which I'm a product of, in a certain point in time, enterprises would only hire graduates for most jobs, not all jobs, but for most jobs, management on up. But I can tell you now that if learners have a certain amount of requisite skills in a Java or an Azure or any number of competencies, machine learning and AI, enterprises are extremely interested in them, foregoing the traditional degree. And in fact, for certain skill sets, as long as that learner has can show that level of competency, they're in. And there's this tremendous need to fill this growing gap between what universities, the graduates and what enterprises are looking for, and they're finding it in a number of different ways. We have organizations, large Fortune 500 companies, that are looking for learners on platforms like ours that have had, some experience in, like I said, machine learning or AI. Maybe they took it from a school, non-credit backed, but have successfully completed the courses. They're using those learners to feed a funnel, because talent acquisition is expensive and the time to hire is expensive. So I think we're all generally aware that this whole paradigm shift in the workforce is changing, and universities have to step up and close that gap and make sure that graduate going out into the world has a defined skill set or a skill set that is transferable from academia to enterprise. So, where this is all pointing, and I think it's obvious, and again, I come from a very linear perspective, but we all have the ability, no matter what size institution, no matter where you are in the world, no matter what the cultural nuances are or the language differences, but we can bridge that gap with online learning. And again, only having 20 minutes today just scratches the surface, but I can tell you, and most of you on this call know, that if you look at where you were back in, was it March 2020, and then look at where you are now, yes, it was difficult, it was painful, it will continue to feel difficult and painful, but you know that there's those tools that are readily accessible, that are seamlessly integrated, that you can incorporate and really provide that necessary real-world experience so your learners, your graduates, can go out into the world successfully and find jobs. I spoke about this in Dubai, but there are such tremendous resources that I think nobody's even had the time to look at. I think the key thing in this 30 minutes is the university or academic institution does not have to shoulder the entire responsibility. That's always been the way it's been in the past, but it doesn't have to be that way anymore. There's this tremendous sharing economy of courses, as I've been pointing out. And the fact that universities can experiment and be flexible, with self-paced learning, with hybrid learning, with cohorts taking the same classes. MIT has done this successfully with our Founders Circuits Electronics course, and the online performers perform as well, and in some cases even better than in person. So there's no one right way. It's whatever's most comfortable, but experimentation with young developing minds, it's exciting for them. It may be painful for you, but it's something that they enjoy, and it tells you a lot. It really shapes your story. And again, edX starting out as a nonprofit, all of our goals really at the end of the day is to increase access. Anybody with a phone or a tablet or an iPad can have access, can have opportunity, and it doesn't make any difference who you are. All those barriers have been brought down. So, when we look at what the digital campus of the future looks like I said, there's no one right way, but everybody from different groups, different stakeholders, can really have a say. And as long as the content remains at the highest level, then again, your learners benefit. So whether it's blended or new programs you bring in or supplemental, you have lots and lots of, great technology that can easily be infused in no matter what system you're currently using. But I would implore you to, break down those barriers and be open to it, because this is the future. This isn't a fad. This isn't going to go away. Again, their brick and mortar will always be a significant part of all learning experience, but there's so many ways to enhance the learning experience. And I see that I've got just enough time for questions. So I'll just throw up these statistics as we go into, do you want me to read questions from the chat, or are you going to read them to me? I hear nothing, so I'm going to go to the chat myself. Let's see.
Thank you, Mr. John. Yes, you can read the questions and go for the answers. Sorry, I was on mute.
Okay, I see Montessori. I don't see any questions per se for me in here. Okay, sorry. The question is, technologies become more than an optional choice for early adopters. How does edX enable teachers, students to reimagine and redefine learning norms beyond classroom boundaries? I mean, that's a great question. And I think that's what we're talking about. The imagination, first and foremost, has to come from the institution. I can tell you, even from the MIT and Harvard experiences, in the very beginning, this was an uphill battle. True story. Anand Agarwal, when he tried to get our first course built on edX, the very first course in circuits and electronics, he couldn't get another MIT professor. Remember, he had already been tenured for 20 plus years. Nobody was really interested in this online learning. And he created this course literally in his basement. You can hear dogs barking in the background. And the goal was, hey, if we got, 1,000 people to look at this course or sign up for this course, in the very first day, they had 25,000 people when this course went live. By the end of the week, 5 days from launch, over 50,000 people. So it really starts with, and I know we don't have a lot of mental bandwidth, but it's really being open to what's out there and thinking, to use your word, a reimagining of the lifelong learning experience. I think we're just about time. I just want to leave everybody again with just a quick look. We are all in this together. There is no one right way. There is no one institution that has it perfect and has it all figured out. The exciting part about being in academia today is actually the change that's happening. And while it's very, very, very challenging and can be very hard on resources and people's lives, as it is on ours as well, there really is a light at the end of the tunnel. And the light is being able to provide this incredible myriad of opportunity, whether you're on campus or off campus or in the world, for all learners around the world. So I really appreciate those of you that stayed for the last session. I hope it was a good way to end your day. And hopefully next time we'll get to be in person.
Definitely, Mr. John, that was really motivating notes there. We have a couple of more questions. I can post that for you. There's a question. Should we be concerned that as the world becomes more decentralized and dependent on technology, would this lead to a higher risk of unmanageable failures?
Look, I think that we all collectively have a reasonably good understanding of the things that benefit learners, right? So the experimentation that I'm talking about, doesn't have a lot of downside risk. A lot of it is professors and academics, being comfortable with technology and comfortable with the change. But the things that are ready for implementation, I hate to use the word plug and play, but it is appropriate because it's exactly what over 1,000 universities did within 1 month when we went to lockdown and did it successfully. So, and failure, by the way, it depends what your definition of failure is. If you didn't roll out a course completely, if you had problems with bandwidth, things like that, that's not a failure. That's a learning experience. And you use those collective learning experiences and disappointments, and if you term it a failure, to just do better the next time. I mean, remember, this whole industry basically started back in 2012. It's kind of like the internet. So we as edX have seen things that we would deem as failures, but they propelled us to make those changes so the quality and execution via technology was a positive experience. I think you have to have failures in order to be successful. It was an excellent question.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mr. John. That was really informative, and thank you for such wonderful insights. I think with this, we come to the end of your session. It was an amazing session we had. Thank you for your time, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me again. I really appreciate it. Enjoy the rest of your day, everybody.
Thank you, Mr. John. Have a good day.
Thank you so much for sharing such valuable inputs. It was a pleasure having you with us today.